All right, so good morning again. So we started our discussion on Wednesday and we talked a little bit about what does it mean to be alive. We're going to look today at one of the pertinent topics in principles of biology, and that is a view of life. We had a discussion post on Wednesday where you responded to this question that I threw out there, that what does it mean to be alive? What is life? And hopefully you've had a chance to respond to that. And after today's lesson, hopefully you can go back and enhance your response a little bit if you feel like it needs to be enhanced at all. So we'll start with the first couple of learning objectives for this chapter. We're in chapter 1. And one of the things we want to be able to do after we finish this discussion is be able to describe features that distinguishes living from non-living, okay? I think intuitively we can think about some things that right away would help us to identify that something is alive versus non-living, but we want to clarify those things and identify some terms that are associated with living and non-living as it relates to principles of biology. We want to be able to describe some of the levels of organization. We can study organisms and life from an organism perspective, but we can also study life from an ecological perspective, thereby taking into account the role of the environment, okay? Will determine the importance of transfer of information within and between systems. And so that's just the concept of DNA and heredity. All right. Life is definitely hinged on the ability to pass genetic information down from one generation to the next, from parent to offspring. And we'll also take a look at that. We'll also talk about the flow of energy. All right, energy is going to be a major requirement for life. Everything that all living organisms do daily, all of the activities, all of the breathing, thinking, moving, walking, digestion, eating, all of those things require an input of energy. So we're going to look at the role of energy and how it flows. What's our original source of energy? All right, where does it come from? How do we acquire energy? How do we obtain that energy? All right. And then we'll talk about some nomenclature. How do we sort of characterize and identify organisms? Okay, there's a systematic way by which we do that. We talked a little bit on Wednesday about the diversity of life and the fact that there's millions and millions and millions of different life forms. All right, so we have to be able to classify that in a very uniform way. All right, so we'll talk about the binomial system of nomenclature. Okay, that's just a fancy term for how we name and classify organisms. All right, and then we'll talk a little bit about evolution. I know evolution can be a little tricky topic sometimes because we all have our personal beliefs, but when we talk about evolution in the sense of biology, we're talking about the origin of life and this concept or this theory that we all evolved from a single common ancestor. Okay, there's a lot of evidence that supports this theory, and again, it's a theory, all right, that is supported by evidence scientific evidence that's been collected over the years. And so we'll go into a little bit of a discussion about evolution, because as you might imagine, as life continues to persist, there has to be a point in which an organism evolves. Okay, evolution is a necessary part of life, and so we'll definitely talk a little bit about that. All right, so let's get going. I posed this question to you already. What does it mean to be alive? Does anyone care to interject their thoughts? What does it mean to be alive? Anyone? No?
May I read my response?
Sure thing.
I put, based on the video, Earth is the only planet that contains life and living organisms. The characteristics of what makes an organism living are movement, response, growth, reproduction, respiration, digestion, absorption, circulation, assimilation, and excretion. Homeostasis is also important for a living organism. Home means constant and stasis means place. Homeostasis is the body's maintenance of a stable internal environment. The body maintains homeostasis by 3 mechanisms: receptors, control centers, and effectors.
That's a very, very great response. You touched on just about, I think I heard just about all of the characteristics that are required to consider something living. All right, so what does it mean to be alive? That's a very open-ended question, because again, depending on who you ask, many people can have different answers for what does it mean to be alive. Most often people say, because I'm breathing, because I can get up and walk, because I can, you know, eat food. Yes, those things let you know that you're alive. We want to establish today, though, a set of criteria that helps us to be clear that if this organism or if this thing does not satisfy all of these criteria, then it is not considered to be a life form. Okay. One of the very sort of controversial things or organisms that we continue to debate whether or not it's alive is a virus, right? Have you've heard of viruses before? We're actually currently dealing with a pandemic because of a virus. Viruses are very unique organisms that to some of us, to some
I
scientists,
really
we
slept
consider
good
them a
for
life
on my
form
soul.
because they cannot,
I really feel
please
energized.
mute your mics. Viruses cannot carry out all of life's properties by themselves. Okay, they are parasites. All right, viruses require a living host, meaning that they have to actually infect a cell in order to carry out all of these other properties that we're going to talk about today. All right,
Straight
so
caught my bitch
there's
ass in the
controversy on what's
shower.
considered living or non-living. All right, let's establish some of those criteria today. Hopefully you're taking notes, and if you have any questions, feel free to interject at any moment or drop your questions in the chat. Okay. Thank you. So, oops. What does it mean to be alive? There are some characteristics of life that all living things, okay, no matter how different they are from one another, they each must be able to share and exhibit this set of common characteristics. So if you're looking at this graphic that I have displayed here, I have an array of different organisms, okay? We have a flower, we have a fish, we have mushrooms, we have insects, we have this rodent, okay? So all living things, and I wanted to, I started to make the distinction the other day that life goes beyond what we think about as life. It's not just, you know, domestic dogs and cats and birds and fish, the things that we see. Life forms are very diverse, okay? And no matter how diverse they are, even the trees and flowers, those are living things. Those are organisms, okay? But all the way down to the bacteria or the fungi and things that you don't see with the naked eye, those are also life forms. And they therefore must also meet these characteristics of life that we're going to characterize right now. Okay, so all living things, no matter how different from one another that they may be, they must share a common set of characteristics. This is what we're establishing today. Okay, and then I keep using this term organism. Okay, the scientific term for a living thing, write this in your notes, is organism. When I say organisms, I'm not talking about something that's out there that's just foreign, that you can't quite imagine what is this organism I'm talking about. The scientific term for anything that's alive is an organism. So you are an organism. I am an organism. Okay, plants and trees and amoebas, all of those are organisms. Okay, and so when you hear me use the term organism, I want you to open up your mind a little bit and think more broadly and about the diversity of life that actually exists. Okay. So the scientific term for a living thing is an organism. So let's look at these basic properties here. The young lady responded to us earlier, and she told us some of these criteria already. Oops, let's go back. Oops. Hold on. Okay, so life. So all living things share some common basic properties. So go ahead and jot these down and then we'll elaborate on them in just a moment. But the first one is cellular organization, okay? All living things are going to contain cells. We'll talk about the cell theory in a little bit in this chapter. And that's the concept that, again, all living things are made up of cells. So cellular organization. This is what you saw in that video that we watched the other day, okay? Reproduction. And I'm going to run through these quickly, but we're going to go through each one of them individually. But reproduction, that's certainly a requirement for life. And we'll expand upon that. But all living things in a every population of organisms has to have reproduction, or else that organism is at risk of becoming extinct. Metabolism, you know, I alluded to this a little bit earlier, that all living things must be able to obtain and utilize energy. Energy is in fact a requirement for life. Okay, we'll talk about metabolism. Homeostasis, the young lady mentioned that earlier. This is a very integral part of being alive, being able to maintain that constant internal environment. Your body is going through all types of processes daily to keep things balanced and at an equilibrium. So homeostasis is important. Heredity. Again, that's the concept again of inheriting or passing down genetic information from one generation to the next. So from parent to offspring. That's absolutely
Did
a
you
requirement for
say,
life.
um,
Please
can you
mute your
repeat that word
phones.
again?
Mute your oh, I'm sorry. Was that a question for me?
Yes.
Which one? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Can you repeat that word again?
Which, heredity or
Oh,
homeostasis?
okay. Thank you. The last
Sure.
one.
We'll talk a little. I think we do have a chapter in this course on genetics, and we'll talk about heredity, principles of heredity. Okay. Responsiveness. The young lady alluded to this earlier. Responsiveness is definitely a requirement for life. If we're unable to respond to what's going on around us, then that might be an indication that we're not alive. Okay. Growth and development. Again, this is obviously a criteria for life, and depending on the organism, this process is going to look a little different. Okay. We think, when we think growth and development from a human standpoint, we're thinking, you know, from the point of conception all the way till we get a newborn baby, and the development doesn't stop. Okay, the growth and development continues. You have a baby, you have an infant, is it a newborn, infant? Well, even from conception, you have a fertilized egg, then you get a embryo, fetus, baby, you know, toddler, adolescent, and then development just continues into adulthood, and we still continue to grow and develop. So that's certainly a requirement for life. And again, that process will look different depending on the organism. All right. Adapting through evolution. Certainly, this is a very important part of being alive. Okay. Adaptation. There's things going on around us. There's changes in the environment, things like global warming, and there's all types of factors that influences our life. And if we lose the ability to adapt or evolve, okay, we become at risk for perishing. Okay, so adaptation and evolution are an important requirement for life. All right, so let's just continue to peruse. Did everybody jot these down as I was kind of talking? Do we have any questions?
Yeah.
Does anything come to mind? Is anything standing out as new or different, or you never thought about it before? You've probably heard about most of this before in your biology class in high school. All right. So again, these characteristics of life, this is just me presenting it again. That cellular organization, all living things are made up of cells. That's a very fundamental point that you need to not leave this class not understanding. We're clear that all organisms grow and develop. And I want you to be able to, you know, expand your mind and understand that this process does look different depending on the organism. Okay. All organisms regulate their metabolic processes. Again, we talked about this concept of metabolism. Write down the word metabolism. Metabolism is a general term for all of the sort of chemical processes that go on in our bodies. When we eat and break down our foods in order to get energy, that's, you know, that's a form of metabolism. Okay. There's thank you.
Can you scan it so I can make photos?
No, you can't take it to Miss Johnson. Why are you in here? Oops. Got to. Sorry, guys.
Can you repeat what you said for metabolism, please?
Okay. Yes. So metabolism means that metabolism is a general term that refers to all of the chemical processes that's going on in our bodies daily, all right, in order to sustain ourselves. So all of the chemical reactions, such again, like I'm thinking about digestion or, you know, waste production, the production of urine, all of those things are types of metabolism. And there are various forms of metabolism where your body breaks down things, but your body can also synthesize and make molecules that are necessary for living. And I think we'll get to a little bit more of a discussion on metabolism shortly. But your body must be able to regulate those metabolic processes. Okay. What is wrong with this? Okay. All organisms respond to stimuli. Again, that responsiveness, this is a very clear indication that you are alive. If you were to stick your hand on a hot stove, you're going to move your hand back quite quickly because your body has the ability to detect when something's wrong and help you to respond quickly. All right. Those neurons are going to send those signals and impulses to your brain, and you're going to snatch your hand back quite quickly off of that hot stove. Okay. If I were to stick you with a pen, again, you're going to feel that quite quickly. Those impulses are going to be sent to your brain, and you're going to respond by probably moving and saying ouch. Okay, so that response to stimuli is typically in the form of a movement. Okay, maintaining homeostasis is a very critical word. Write this word down and understand what it means. Homeostasis is the state of being in sort of a balanced equilibrium. Okay, your body works hard constantly 24 hours a day to keep things the way that they should be internally. Okay, now we use this term homeostasis to refer to a normal or balanced state, but I like to interject that normal is a relative term. And so we have what we would consider a normal body temperature, but it's not, you know, your normal may not necessarily be the 98.6 degrees, but that's kind of an average. Yes, I see a hand raised.
Can you repeat?
Go ahead, Miss Shaw.
What homeostasis means?
I'm sorry.
Can you repeat what you said about homeostasis?
Okay. Homeostasis is just a term that refers to a constant equilibrium internally, a stable, like a constant or stable internal environment. Okay. Your body has mechanisms and processes in place that it carries out in order to try and maintain homeostasis. Okay. For example, if you get an infection and you feel your forehead and you realize that you have a temperature or a fever, that's your body attempting to rid you of that infection. That's a mechanistic response to an infection. Okay, so go ahead and write that term down and be careful to look for it as you move through your readings. Okay. So that's a requirement for life. All organisms must have that ability to maintain that constant internal environment, or else things will continue to go awry and it could put an organism at risk of losing life. Okay. Reproduction. Now, this is one of those ones where people, and I say, well, reproduction is a requirement for life. And they're like, well, I don't have to reproduce. I don't want to have any kids. Well, we're speaking from a population standpoint, from a population of organism or population standpoint, that some individuals in that population have to reproduce, or else that species will risk extinction. Okay, so when I say reproduction, all organisms must reproduce. Some members of that species of organisms have to reproduce. Okay, or that species is at risk of extinction. And again, I already touched on this a little bit, that all organisms must evolve and adapt to its environment. There's changes that are going on. You can imagine that over the years, there's again been changes in from everything from climate to the foods that we eat, you know, the persistence of diseases, our bodies, our genetic makeup. Okay, so part of evolution has to deal with our genetics. Okay, our DNA. We inherit genetic material, DNA, from our parents. Okay, we get some from mom and some from dad. And what happens is that we acquire our DNA. In our DNA, if we're inbred and we're born with the ability to persist as best we can. So we acquire the changes in our DNA over generations, okay, that are equipping us with the ability to survive. Okay, so this concept of evolution is closely connected to our DNA. Okay, so we inherit these changes in our DNA that are basically providing us with a survival advantage. And this is what happens over the years and over different generations. Okay, you're inheriting this DNA that is, in theory, equipping you to survive better. Okay, and this is just another schematic. I'm going to let you take a moment and look at it. For those of you who are visual, it's just running through again the same thing. I'm trying to, you know, adhere to all different learning styles here. So we've got people who are visual who may need to look at this, and then some of us like to hear it. Okay, so growth and development, getting bigger, getting more complex, some type of development going on in the organism. Metabolism, again, is the acquisition and use of energy. Homeostasis, maintaining that relatively constant internal environment. We want things to stay nice and balanced at the equilibrium. Adaptation, adjusting over time due to mutations. Okay, now that sounds a little weird, but these mutations are actually a good thing. They're alterations in your DNA that are providing you with an advantage for surviving the different changes that you will encounter. Okay, responding to stimuli. Again, this is you responding to things in the external environment, and it's often going to be in the form of a movement. Okay, organization, made up of cells. All of the things are made up of cells. As a very clear concept here for understanding requirements for life. The most basic and fundamental unit of life is the cell. Okay, so we'll talk in great detail about the cell. And then reproduction, again, generating offsprings. If any species of organisms fails to reproduce, then eventually that species will become extinct. Okay. What questions do we have about this? Is it pretty clear? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
It's pretty clear.
Yes, it's clear.
Okay. And so if you read ahead, did you get a good chance to, does this kind of serve as a review for you now, if you were able to read ahead a little bit? How many of you were able to read ahead? Chapter 1 that we discussed on Wednesday.
Me.
Anybody take a look at it? Sure.
Yes.
I did.
Okay, awesome. So this helps, right? Having read it before and then we're coming and having our discussion, does that kind of help a little bit so that it's not so foreign?
Yes.
Yes, continue to do that. All right, let's keep going, guys. So take out a piece of paper. In your notes, let's have a checkpoint. If I were to ask you, this is a real question that I would ask on an exam. And you would answer this in your own open-ended questions. I like open-ended questions, okay? How do we distinguish the living from non-living? How would you respond to that? If this was an exam question for you, what would you say? Take a few moments and respond to that in your notebook. Okay. Are we still working? Can someone read to me what you wrote? How would you distinguish living from non-living?
Can I answer?
Sure.
I said something that is not living does not use energy.
Okay, absolutely. That's definitely true. But you would have to expand that answer a little bit for me, but absolutely. Anyone
Can
else?
I answer? I said by looking at the basic properties of life, for example, a rock will not be able to fulfill all of the basic properties that a human can.
Okay, absolutely. So that's what I want you to see. I want you to be able to interject what characteristics would a living thing exhibit, and the fact that a non-living thing, for example, the rock, I like that, wouldn't be able to carry out those examples. So write down these two terms for me and go ahead and contrast them for homework. Biotic and abiotic. Biotic is spelled B-I-O-T-I-C. Biotic versus abiotic. Okay, you may have come across those terms in your reading already, but if you haven't, biotic means living, abiotic means non-living, without life. That prefix a in biology means without. Abiotic, non-living. Okay, take a look at that for homework. Let's push through this a little bit more. So one of our most important requirements for life from an organism perspective is the ability to reproduce. Okay, reproduction. This looks different depending on the organisms. Two major forms of reproduction. Write them down: asexual and sexual reproduction. You've certainly heard about this before in your high school biology class. Okay, two major forms of reproduction: asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. Can someone raise their hand and tell me the difference between these two forms of reproduction?
Sexual requires two organisms, and asexual only requires one.
Absolutely. Now, did you know this already, or did you just review it when you read chapter 1? Or did you remember it from high school?
I remember from high school.
Absolutely. Okay, so two major distinctions here. Asexual reproduction is only going to require one parent, whereas sexual reproduction, if you just think about sex or copulation, that's going to require two parties. Okay, asexual reproduction is typically a faster form of reproduction, where you're basically going to just like duplicate what's there. We see this a lot in smaller, less complex organisms such as bacteria and fungi and so forth. And you basically have one organism that's going to duplicate its genetic material and essentially break off into two. All right, for example, bacteria reproduce asexually. Their form of reproduction is called binary fission. Okay, write that down, binary fission. Okay. Binary fission is, again, a form of reproduction where only one parent is involved. This is asexual reproduction, where that parent cell will basically duplicate the genetic material and break off into two new organisms. All right, asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction, as this image here illustrates, requires two parties. Okay. This is what happens to reproduce humans. Okay, we're going to require the union of genetic information from two parties, mom and dad. Okay, that sperm and egg has to join. That the formation of that zygote is the creation of a new being. All right. So asexual and sexual reproduction, you need to be able to contrast these two forms of reproduction in terms of the requirements. Okay, one parent or two parents. Another thing that you can think about here is the diversity or the difference of the offspring. Okay, individuals that are reproduced by way of asexual reproduction are basically going to be identical, okay, to the parent. So we sometimes refer to this process as cloning. Right? Whereas individuals that are created by sexual reproductions from two parents, that offspring is not going to be identical to one or the other, but it's going to basically be a mixture of both parents. Okay, so I know we can conceptualize what happens with the human. We are produced when the genetic information from both mom and dad are joined together, right? And so you might physically exhibit characteristics or features that make you look like both mom and dad. Okay, that's because you got genetic information from both of them. All right, so read a little bit more about that. All right, and then when we talk about an organism, just in general, organisms have different degrees of complexity. Okay, we can refer to or categorize an organism, and remember, organism is the scientific term for anything that's living. An organism can be considered unicellular or multicellular. Okay, a unicellular organism is one that is less complex. It only contains one cell. Okay, remember we talked about cellular organization being one of the requirements for life. That just means that all living things are going to be made up of cells. And so in this case, we can further categorize this organism as being either unicellular, meaning it only is made up of one cell, only contains one cell that can carry out all of the functions that are essential for life, or it can be made up of many, many, many cells. And we use that term multi, okay? One of the things I want you to get used to doing in biology is looking at prefixes for words. So even if you see words and you have no clue, just right offhand what that word means, you might be able to break it down or get some ideas by looking at prefixes, okay? The prefix unicellular, uni means what?
One.
One, and multi means?
Many.
Many. Okay, so these are ways that you can help to try to be a little bit more intuitive about what these words might mean, even if you haven't been formally introduced to them. Okay, but when we talk about organisms, living things, we can refer to them as being multicellular organisms or unicellular. Now, multicellular organisms are typically going to be way more complex. They're going to be made up of many, 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 many million, billions, and trillions of cells that all have individual functions. Okay, would humans be considered multicellular or unicellular?
Multi.
Multi.
Okay, what about a dog?
Multi.
Multi.
What about bacteria?
Multi.
Unicellular.
All right, absolutely. So bacteria are in fact unicellular organisms. They're very unique. They are very simple cells, and we'll contrast some cell types as well. Let's just keep pushing through this. All right, so real quick, right here, you should be able to, in your notes, identify or give me examples of organisms that will fall under, the title of either unicellular or multicellular. This is a schematic, again, for those of us that are visual. I'm trying my best to, diversify and include all learning types. Okay, so organisms that are composed of only one cells, we refer to them as unicellular organisms. Examples include bacteria, yeast, and protozoa. Okay, multicellular organisms consist of many cells. Okay, these are always going to be eukaryotic cells. All right, and when we get, I think in another slide or two, we'll talk about the broad classification of organisms as either eukaryotic or prokaryotic. All right.
Can you go back to the other side real quick?
I'm sorry?
Can you go back to the other one real quick, please?
Oh, yeah. Go back a slide. This one?
Yes. Okay, to go. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so organisms that consist of many different cells are going to be multicellular organisms. Examples include plants, animals, and some fungi. Okay, these are always going to be eukaryotic organisms. All right, by contrast, prokaryotic organisms are always unicellular. Okay, and those are going to be bacteria almost exclusively. When we talk about prokaryotic organisms, we're talking about bacteria. Okay, so the yeast and protozoa, those are examples of unicellular organisms that are eukaryotic. All right, somebody needs to mute their background. All right, let's go ahead and stop here for today. We'll pick up with this discussion on Monday about the levels of organization for organisms. All right, we can organize life, you know, from an organism perspective and also from a environmental or ecological perspective. We'll pick up here on Monday. What questions do we have?
I have a question.
Mute your mics, please, if you're not asking a question.
I have a question. For the homework, you gonna post it on Blackboard, or are we just doing it in our notes?
What was the question again? I'm sorry. I'm trying to respond to the chat. Would I post?
Are you posting the homework assignment on Blackboard for our notes?
I didn't get you. The assignment has our reading assignment from Wednesday.
No, you just said a homework assignment was to compare and contrast.
Oh no, I won't post that. That's one of those lecture kind of things. So what did I say? Compare and contrast.
Abiotic and biotic.
Abiotic and bio. Yeah, this is for you to just further understand what we're talking about today.
Okay.
Sure. Also, if you haven't, if you're unclear, I think I have some slides where we'll talk about it, karyotic, but be able to understand the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic. I'm putting it in chat. And so, Camille, you'd like me to go back to which slide? Okay. All right. Well, if we don't have any questions, continue to work through the assignment that was posted in Blackboard for Connect, and you're basically reading through chapter 1 and you're responding to the learning objectives that I listed. Okay, I gave you some very specific learning objectives to respond to in your notebook, so continue to work on that. If you haven't gotten your book as yet, please work on getting that this weekend. We're going to have our first graded assignments from the Connect platform on next week. Okay, go back to, okay, is it the multicellular, this one?
All right.
Is this the one you guys wanted me to go back to? Or yeah,
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You were kind of cutting out, so will you repeat what you said?
Oh, I'm sorry. About what? The homework?
There's something before that.
The Connect or the
Yes.
Prokaryotic and eukaryotic?
Yes.
Okay, I put those two terms in chat. I just said that if you couldn't remember the distinction between these two classifications of organisms, to go ahead and review that also. Prokaryotic versus eukaryotic. Like, how do we distinguish between those two types of organisms?
Okay. Can you go over the homework again? You cut out.
So there's no new homework assignment. The one that's posted in Blackboard right now to read chapter 1 and respond to the learning objectives. It was posted on Wednesday. So the only thing that you might be thinking of as homework right now is contrasting the terms biotic and abiotic, and then eukaryotic and prokaryotic. But this is just in your notes. This is just filling in your notes.
And for the reading thing,
yes.
Do we have to like, where do we post the answers for that?
No, that's just in your notes. You're just responding to those learning objectives in your notebook.
Mm-hmm. Okay, are we gonna go over learning objectives in a future lecture? Or no?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we're gonna go over the ones that I assigned to you. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. All right, guys, if you don't have any questions, we'll stop here today and we'll pick up with organization on Monday. Okay? Have a great weekend.
You too.
Bye, thanks.
Have a great weekend.